We're starting the series today about spiritual renewal, and today we're going to be speaking specifically about the pits and prisons that we experience in our life. And the whole series we're going to be looking at least within the link, we're going to be looking at the book of Judges. We are going to be doing it in line with our home groups, as I mentioned, Turnaround. It's a book by Forrest Long. It's called The Orthodox Purpose-Driven Life. What we're going to be doing is reading through Monday through Friday, days 1 through 5, and then Saturday and Sunday you're off. Okay? When your home groups meet, you're going to discuss some of the questions, some of the materials in days 1 through 5. If you're not in a home group, as I mentioned, please still pick up a copy and follow along with us. In the book of Judges, we find the story picking up after the death of Joshua, who was the disciple of Moses. Now, Moses was this great, big character, great leader who led the children of Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery. Joshua was the guy who took over for Moses after he departed, and he was the person who led and fought against all the enemies of Israel in the land of Canaan. It was kind of like the closest thing that I could relate it to in my context, the Coptic context, was like you have a Pope Kyrillos type of a figure who was this big man of prayer who led the church, actually helped revive the church into a life of prayer, into an experience of prayer, to be he really revived prayer in our church. Okay? Prayer in the church at a certain point had just become like Sunday liturgy, and that was it. And there was no services outside of that. Church was not in a healthy place back in the 40s, 50s. Some not very good leadership, but Pope Kyrillos comes along and he revives it through his own life of prayer. Pope Shenouda comes along and he starts fighting against some wrong teachings and stuff like that. He was a man who stood up against some bad guys in government, all that kind of stuff. Okay, and then Pope Shenouda passes away. And I hear people say, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? And sure enough, there's another leader who comes along. Okay? There's always someone who comes along. And this is probably what I think that what are we going to do now is probably what people were thinking after Moses died and certainly after Joshua died. And we're going to pick up in Judges chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass, the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. The children of Israel, even though they lost two great leaders, Moses and Joshua, they continue to have conquest and victory in the land of Canaan. However, something happens a little bit later in the chapter. In Judges chapter 1, verse 19, we find the following passage. So the Lord was with Judah, who was the first one who would go up. The Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland, because they had chariots of iron. In other words, they continued to have victory, but there were certain sins that they couldn't overcome. Now, interestingly, in the next 10, 11 verses, the same phrase is repeated 7 times. It says that they could not drive out certain people or certain sins. Now, I think every one of us has experienced this at some point in our lives, where we're walking with God, we've committed ourselves to being God, we are testing out the idea of walking with God, and the more we grow closer in a relationship with Him, we find victory, but there are certain things that stick that we can't seem to get rid of. There are certain sins that we can't drive them out no matter how hard we try. Sometimes we feel like we are stuck in sin. And what we want to do in those situations oftentimes withdraw and just be alone and isolate ourselves. But the other option is another type of isolation. In the book Turnaround, on page 6, I think it's day 2, you'll be reading it on Tuesday, the author says, do you ever just want to be alone? And some people would say, yes, I feel every time I sin, I just want to be alone. And he says, well, in that situation, you would want to be alone and retreat and be with God in order to find victory over what it is that you're struggling with. One of the challenges that we face is that when we sin, we feel like we can't go to God. We feel stuck. We feel we can't go to Him. We're not accepted. There's no place for us at the table. This series, we're going to be talking all about spiritual renewal. We're going to talk about how we can go from being stuck to being free. How we can go from like being held down to being free to fly. We're going to talk about going from death to life. We're going to talk about 2 Corinthians 5:17, one of the most beautiful passages, reminds us whoever is in Christ is a new creation. Which means there's a transformation of our lives, because the apostle says, old things pass away, behold, all things become new. Which means the newness that we experience in Christ is one that transforms our very being, our very lives, and liberates us from some of the things that we just can't seem to overcome in life. The good news for us, in Romans chapter 8, verse 31 and 35, we're told, what shall we say then? What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He lists a bunch of things that are difficult, that are holding them back, that are attacking him, that are, like St. Paul saying, all kinds of problems around me. He's saying, what shall we say then? If God is for us, who can be against us? Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulations or distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, or sword? He's saying nothing can separate me from God. Nothing will stand in the way of me pursuing God, and nothing can block God's love coming towards me. This whole series, the main idea we're going to be talking about is how it is that God who made us also can remake us. God who made us also can remake us. Now, you'll remember from the work on the Incarnation, St. Athanasius, this is one of his central tenets. That only God, who is creator, is the one who can recreate us. And that's really what we're asking for during this season of life. That God, who made us at the very beginning, He's going to remake us. That God who remade us when we started our life with Him will continue to remake us and continue to perfect His image within us. Now, one of the things that you'll say, though, is I don't feel like that remade being. I feel like a slivery little worm. Okay? And this is exactly how King David felt at a certain point in his life. You could say a worm or a little caterpillar, something that is crawling on the ground, that is slimy, that is not soaring free. King David says in Psalm 22, verse 6, I am a worm and no man, or no human. He says, I don't feel like a person. I feel like a worm. A reproach of men and despised by evil. This is a person here that is stuck in a pit and feels like an ugly, slimy little worm. Now, this person will have certain things that they will experience. The first thing is, they will feel stuck and overwhelmed. Now, years ago, this was back when I lived in Houston, it must have been 1980-something. I was like 7 years old. And I had just moved to Houston, and my neighbors wanted to do this magic trick. And they put me in this box. And you know the box where they like put a sword through? Like they were going to try this magic trick. I was 7 years old. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And my brother looks and sees it. He's like, what are you doing? He comes and he rips the box open and pulls me out. And he jumps the guys and says, don't do this to my brother. I felt so stuck. I started at one point when the stick started coming through. It was like a broomstick, all right? Not a sword, all right? No one's going to kill me, hopefully. So when it started coming through, I started getting real uncomfortable and swerving and trying to move around. But I felt stuck because I was being held in. That's how we feel sometimes when we are in sin. That we feel like we want to get out, but we feel stuck. And not only that, we don't just feel stuck, it's like an overwhelming feeling, like a claustrophobic feeling. Now, I'm not claustrophobic. But I imagine those who are, if I told them, you're going to be in a box like that, the feeling that they would have. That's what it might feel like to be stuck in sin. The second feeling that one might have or experience is that they would feel all alone. Some of the reasons that people want to be alone is they feel guilty, depressed, scared, deflated, exhausted. One of the interesting things that you'll find that's different about, like, I think one of the most beautiful creatures out there is a butterfly. Now, butterflies, if you've noticed, they live in communities. Caterpillars live all alone. They live alone. There's only one type of caterpillar, which is the eastern tent caterpillar, don't know where it's from, that lives in community. All other caterpillars live by themselves. When we are stuck down in the dirt, it separates us from other people. It separates us from community. It separates us, or at least gives us that feeling that we're separated from God. Third and final, about that worm, is the worm oftentimes will dig through trash. They'll eat like leftovers. They'll eat that stuff and they'll decompose and they'll make stuff with it, but they're eating trash nonetheless. This image is the image that I see of the prodigal son. Prodigal son did what? He went and he ate pig food. Pig food. This is what happens when we get stuck in sin. We eat the junk that's not for us. But it's all that's there, and quite frankly, it doesn't satisfy us. It doesn't nourish us. It doesn't fill us. So that's what a worm might look like, or a caterpillar or whatever. And the place for that thing is down in the pit. So what is a pit? You guys discussed it in your discussion section. I'm going to offer you 4 characteristics of a pit, and then a few different types of pit, and we'll wrap up. All right? First thing is, what is a pit? A pit, number 1, is a state that you pass through. It's something that you experience. It's not a place. A pit is not your home. A pit is not a circumstance. It's not, I had this problem at work. It's not a person. It's not your relationship status. It's not marriage or singleness. That's not a pit. Okay? Someone actually said it to me once, one of the priests I used to serve with, he said about this whole relationship thing. He says, people oftentimes feel like, married people sometimes feel like they're in a pit, single people sometimes feel like they're in a pit. And he says to me, he goes, listen, marriage is like a castle. Those on the inside want out, those on the outside want in. Okay? Very interesting. Sometimes we feel like our relationship status is a pit. A pit is not a person or lack of person. It's not a circumstance or lack of. It's not a place or lack of that. It's not your job. It is a state that we might be in our minds and our hearts and our very being, that we pass through and that we hopefully will pass out of. Number 2 is that state is a state of being a slave to sin, or a slave in bondage to a specific habit. St. John Chrysostom said it very nicely. He was a bishop who lived at the end of the 4th century. He was the bishop of the city of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. And he says in one of his homilies, he says, if you are a slave to sin, even though you are 10,000 times free, it's very Semitic, like very old worldly, like 10,000 times free, you have no good of your freedom. Like your freedom that you have experienced means nothing. He says you could live in the freest country in the world. God bless the United States of America, land of the free, home of the brave. He says, but if we are slaves to sin, that means nothing. It means nothing at all. He says we live in the freest country in the world, but if we're not free from sin, he says we're not really free at all. Number 3 is that a pit is something that makes us feel powerless. Makes us feel powerless. How do we know if we're stuck? What do we feel? We feel stuck, we feel trapped, we feel ashamed. Sometimes we feel powerless. We feel like we just can't do anything. we want to get out, and let me be clear on something. I think most people in pit hate being in the pit. They want to get out of the pit. I don't think anyone wakes up and says, man, I love the fact that I'm stuck in this pit. This is wonderful. This is the best place to be. I love the fact that I'm addicted to this sin. I love the fact that I can't quit cursing. I love the fact that I have anger issues. I love that. That makes my day. I don't think most normal people don't wake up thinking that. Okay? Problem is, no matter how many times we try, we feel powerless. We feel like there's nothing I can do. Can't get out. Can't stop. What do I do at this point? When you feel powerless, you feel like it's impossible to do anything and even to know anything about God. Number 4. I think being in a pit, it's an experience of hell on earth. It's an experience of hell on earth. Okay? Hell is a place where there's torment and there's loneliness. Hell is a place where it's like it's just darkness. You feel like all the other things that we've said, like this probably would sum it all up. St. Augustine, he says the following. He says, I had almost plunged into the pit, which is preparing sinners. That is, my soul had dwelt in hell. St. Augustine is describing his life. His life before he came to know God. He said, man, my life was in hell. My soul was already down there in hell. Psalm 143 verse 7 says, do not hide your face from me, lest I be like those who go down into the pit. So when we hide our face from God, when we stray away from Him, what happens is we begin to experience the pit. Now, let's look at a few types of pits here. All right, so what are the pits? So we've described what an experience of pit might look like. What are some pits? And this is not an exhaustive list. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Okay? I'm just going to give you 5 or 6 of the big ones. Different types of pit. You guys know the game Pitfall, Atari? Anyone know what Atari is? Right. Those of you who don't?
I know what Atari is. I just
haven't heard of it. So, Atari 2600. My favorite game was Pitfall. And one of the funnest things about Pitfall is you have to swing and jump and try to avoid certain pits. Okay? Now, if you could avoid those pits, you would live. These are some of the pits that we need to avoid, because if we don't, they'll kill us. Okay? Crocodiles. Let's talk about the crocodiles. Crocodiles, right here, is pride. That's the big one. Pride is the mother. Pride is the mother of all other sin. Most of the church fathers, if they talk about pride, first thing they say is humility, mother of all virtue. Pride, mother of all sin. Pride, kill us. Okay? Pride. Pride is looking down on others, just like this guy right here, looking down on others, while at the same time doing what? Refusing to look up at God. It's refusing to acknowledge God and who He is and His sovereignty, while at the same time looking down on others in a judgmental way. Augustine again here describing pride. He said, this is his commentary on Psalm 94. He says, what do the words, until the pit is dug up for the sinner, mean? He's saying, is this for one person? No. The whole race of such that are sinners? No. Those who are proud, he's saying those who have this pit dug up for them, it's not about a whole race, not about one person. He's saying it's for those who are proud. For he said before, reward the proud after they're deserving. Who is the proud? And then he goes on and he lists a few things that describe proud people. 3 symptoms of pride that he lists. And again, this is not exhaustive. First thing that he describes is refusing the mystery of confession. Okay? Apparently this was an issue back then. It continues to be an issue today. All right? He says some people refuse the mystical life, and specifically he's talking about the mystery of confession. He who does not by confession of his sins do penance, that he may be healed through his humility, or her humility. So he's saying the first thing that we have to be mindful of, that's a symptom of pride, like a lot of people say, I don't want to confess. Whether to God or to God in presence of priests, I don't want to confess. I don't need to confess. He's saying this is a symptom of pride. Number 2, he offers is greed. Greed. Augustine again here continues. He who chooses to claim to himself those few things which he seems to possess, and who detracts from the mercy of God. He's saying we sometimes take everything to ourselves, are greedy, and as a result of that greed, which is caused by pride, it keeps us in a pit. Why? Because we don't extend to others the grace that God extends to us. Okay? So as a result, holding on to all that stuff weighs us down. Number 3 thing he mentions. So he mentions refusing the mysteries, specifically confession. He mentions greed. And number 3, he mentions being judgmental. And what he says here, Augustine says here, is he who, although he ascribes unto God his good works, yet he insults those who do not those good works, and raises himself above them. He's saying a proud person, he'll do good things, she'll do good things, but they'll look at others judgmentally. They'll look down on other people. Okay? It says this is probably the mother. This is the mother of all sin. And in our discussion group, by the way, judgmentalness came up over and over and over again. Why? Because we've experienced it before. And it's something that we as a community and as persons within the community want to overcome and avoid as being part of how we do things. Why? Because when we are, what it does is it not only keeps us in the pit, but it keeps other people in the pit as well. Okay? Another one that he mentions here is willful disobedience. Willful disobedience. This is like this is not a picture of my kid, but my kid, I saw my kid do this one time to another adult, and I was like, the adult was correcting them, and the child just turned around and stuck their tongue out at them. They were telling them, don't do this, and they... Willful disobedience. This is the prodigal son. Prodigal son is, I'm going to do what I want to do. Doesn't matter what you tell me. Doesn't matter how many times you say it. Doesn't matter who says it. I'm going to do what I want to do. Again, St. Augustine. We're going to be looking at Augustine a lot here. Listen to what he says here when he's quoting Psalm 143. Scripture calls it a pit, that into which depth a sinner has come. He shows regard or disobedience. He no longer believes in God's providence. Or if that person does believe, they think they no longer have to obey him. He's saying we either don't believe anymore. Those who are in, like, this willful disobedience keeps us in a pit. Either we don't believe, or if we believe, we say, that's not for me. That's for other people. Seeking the loopholes. Right? So this is the second thing he mentions. Third thing is distraction. Distraction. I think one of the things that most challenges most of us is getting distracted by things in life. Getting distracted sometimes by sin. Getting distracted by just not bad things, by the way. Sometimes it's good things that happen, but they draw us away. This last week when I was, last weekend, a couple days ago, I was on a retreat, and we were talking about prayer. And some of the young people asked, like when I'm praying, sometimes I get distracted. My mind goes away. What do? And someone said, well, you just have to fight the distraction. And just keep fighting the distraction. I said, no, you got to deal with the distraction. And I said, how do I deal with distraction? I said, write it down, push it to the side, and come back and focus. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the entire time you're in prayer, all you're going to be thinking about is that distraction that's in your mind. So write it down or type it out, put it down, and come back and focus. Like, distractions just don't go away because we try to fight it. We have to literally do something to deal with a distraction. That's just one example, okay? We got to do something to deal with the distraction so that we can come back and focus on what it is we need to focus on. In the early church, St. Augustine is describing something, a passage here in Galatians, we're not going to go through it, but he talks about how the church at the time in Asia Minor, they were getting distracted to go back and be under the bondage of the law. So they were distracted away from the grace of God that was offered to them, back to the law. Okay? Another one he mentions here that can cause us, or types of pit, or things that cause us to fall into pit, is innocence. Sometimes, like Joseph, we get thrown in. He didn't do anything to deserve it. Joseph didn't do anything to deserve what happened to him, right? Sometimes things happen that can cause us to get sucked into a pit. You guys know the story of the 10 coins? You have the 100 sheep, 10 coins, 100 sheep, 2 brothers, 10 coins. Okay? All in the same chapter. One of the coins was lost. Mom is there, the woman is there trying to turn the whole house upside down looking for it. The coin didn't do anything wrong. The coin didn't do anything about anything. It innocently was lost. It's an example about how sometimes we can be lost due to innocence. We didn't do anything. Sometimes death. Sometimes broken families, sickness, broken relationships, broken heart. Sometimes those things can affect us in such a way, they put us into a pit. And if we don't deal with those things, or someone isn't there to help us, or we don't turn to God or to the right God, we get stuck in pits. Last thing here. False sense of security. False sense of security. Judges chapter 2 verses 1 to 31. 1 to 3 rather. Now we're not going to read the whole chapter, right? Judges 2 chapter 1 to 3. Then the angel of the Lord came from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I led you up from Egypt, brought you to the land of which I swore to your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. God makes a promise to the children of Israel. True or false? I will never break my covenant with you. Some people in the children of Israel, they said, take that to the bank. He made a promise. Continue. And you shall make no covenant. There's another side, by the way. You shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down the altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. He said, I made a covenant. You were supposed to make a covenant or keep the covenant. Your end of the bargain was keep the covenant. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. Therefore, I said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall be thorns in your side. They shall be thorns in your side. God makes a promise. We are supposed to keep the promise. When we don't, there's a consequence, folks. A false sense of security based on a half reading of Scripture can sometimes drive us into the pit. Last summer, my daughter, I said to her, if you clean your room, take it to Froyo. As soon as you get home from school, clean your room, go to Froyo. All she could think about was Froyo. I came home after, she got picked, this was at the beginning of the school year. Came home, she had been picked up, hanging out, came in, I'm looking around, looked at her room, big old mess. So I went and sat on the couch. And she comes up and she's all ready to go. Shoes on, jacket on, she's ready to go. And she said, let's go, I'm ready to go. I said, we're not going anywhere. And she said, what? She said, you said we're going to Froyo. I said, no, I didn't say that. She said, yes, you did. Joseph, Dad, you said that. I said, no, I didn't. I said, if you clean your room, by the time I get home, we'll be going to Froyo. She said, I'll go clean it now. I said, no, we're not going to. We're not going to. We had an agreement. This is what happened with the children of Israel. God said, keep my covenant. I'm making a covenant with you. Keep it. And I get you back. I should take care of it. When we don't do, and we find ourselves in the pit, folks, forgive me, God is not broken in those situations. It's us. We're broken. And the reason I'm highlighting this point, sometimes I find people, they're saying, yeah, but God left me, God abandoned me, God didn't do it. I'm like, no. God is never broken. God is consistent. God has been doing God since God was, which is always. The problem is never God. It's never been God. The problem is me. I get a false sense of security because I heard one part of the story and I'm like, he said that and I'm good. No. There was another part of the story that I ignored. It's called selective listening. Okay? We all do it sometimes. A lot of us do it in marriage. A lot of us do it with our kids. But we all do it sometimes. Most of us do it with God at some time. The bottom line that I want us to get for today is that you were not made to live in a pit but a palace. One of the most beautiful stories in Scripture is the story of Joseph. Joseph was taken from his father's house into slavery, into a pit, and finally ended up in a palace, which was where he's supposed to be. And this is the story of humanity. We were taken from our father's house into a pit, but we're not supposed to stay there, folks. We are destined to live in a palace. We are destined to live as created beings, renewed beings in God's palace, living a life with God. Final points here. 4 keys that I want you to remember about the pit, and I want you to take home with you very quickly. Number 1 is there's nothing good about the pit. There's nothing good about the pit, folks. Tertullian, he lived at the end of the 2nd century, he said to Christians, the prison or the pit is unpleasant, yet we were called to the warfare of the living God in our very response to the Word. He's saying there's nothing positive about that place. Nothing. Nothing. So long as we remind ourselves there's nothing good about spiritual imprisonment or nothing good about the pit, it'll give us the proper context. Number 2 is remember God will never leave you. I love the story of the footprints. Love the story of the footprints. Someone was just telling me recently, they said, like, things have gotten really bad in life. And I sent them, I downloaded an image of the footprints and sent it to them. And they said, thank you, that's actually my favorite poem. I needed that reminder. God never leaves us. Tertullian, again, he says, grieve not. He's continuing the same passage. Grieve not the Holy Spirit who has entered the prison with you. If you're there, he's there with you. For if he had not gone with you there, you would not have been here this day. He says, no matter where you've been, he's been there with you. God never abandons us, even, and I would say especially, when we're in that place. Number 3 is you are in that prison to have victory. You are there, not to be stuck there, but to experience victory in that place. The prison indeed is the devil's house as well, where he keeps his family. But you have come within its walls for the very purpose of trampling the wicked one underfoot in his chosen oath. Man, I love this passage. God is saying you're in that place right now, not to be stuck there, but to trample over the devil's head right now. God didn't bring us to that place or allow us to be brought to that place so we could be crushed there. He says, I want you, while you're in that place, have victory for me there. Trample it underfoot. Trample him underfoot. Have victory wherever you're at. 4th and final. I asked the question at the beginning, how should we offer care for those who are in prison or who are experiencing sin and bondage? I want to close with this because I really hope we take this to the bank with us and we extend this to ourselves and to the people in our lives who might be in this place. Saint Cyprian, he lived around the year 250 AD, he was a bishop of Carthage in northern Africa, I believe it is. And he says, manifest all care for those who with a glorious voice have confessed the Lord and are confined in prison. Some people have confessed Christ. They are seeking Christ, but they are stuck in a place of prison. When you look around at your brothers and sisters, and you wonder, like, why? Like, man, people are stuck in sin. Like, what's going on? They should have... He says we need to offer those people extra care. Offer them extra care. Offer them extra love. Manifest all care for those who confess Christ but are yet still stuck in prison. Okay? I'm going to close with that. Just a final reminder, we are not made to live in the pit, folks. We're made for the palace. Enjoy that and have victory. I want to encourage you as you go forward, if you haven't already gotten the book, please pick it up today. Okay? Please order it on Amazon. 2-day shipping today. And the rest of you who have gotten it already, please start tomorrow morning, Monday morning, with day 1. All right? Let's pray.